I have an epic war with Ellen DeGeneres, and I have a loathing for her that is epic in size as well.
You know, mostly about children and women. And those are the people that I always wanted to protect and take care of.
The moment this wound reopened, everything changed. Because Rosie wasn't just talking about a betrayal. She was talking about something darker, something that involved the most vulnerable people on the Epstein network.
Why didn't they just walk away? Well, they were 17 and 21. They were kids.
And that's when Kathy Griffin finally broke her silence. That's when the Department of Justice got involved. That's when everything Ellen had built to protect herself came crashing down.
I was investigated by the Department of Justice.
So you're the queen of cancel.
Who put me under an investigation, put me on the no-fly list, interrogated me under oath, and were considering charging me with conspiracy.
One question echoes through everything that's about to unfold. What did Ellen actually do to keep the victims silent? And why was she willing to destroy anyone, including federal investigation of her allies, to make sure the truth never came out? That's where this story begins. For nearly 2 decades, Ellen DeGeneres stood on a stage and told millions of people every single day, be kind to one another. And they believed her. They wanted to believe her, because believing in her meant the world still had genuinely good people in it. But here's what nobody wanted to accept. The most carefully constructed lies require the most extensive protection networks, and Ellen didn't build that network alone.
I have an epic war with Ellen DeGeneres, and I have a loathing for her that is epic in size as well.
You know, mostly about children and women. And those are the people that I always wanted to protect and take care of.
I am like sort of blacklisted in Hollywood because they're afraid of me.
One thing I want to do is I just want to stay in it. You know, I'm not going to let them.
This wasn't just anger. This was a woman who had finally decided that silence was no longer an option, and she was about to pull apart a decades-long cover-up that involved some of the most powerful people in entertainment. But to understand why Rosie broke down, you have to understand the history. You have to understand that Rosie and Ellen weren't just competitors. They were once family. They survived together in an industry designed to crush women like them. In the late 1980s and early 1990s, the stand-up comedy scene was absolutely brutal, especially for women. Women who didn't fit the mold. Women who had secrets they were forced to hide. Women who faced constant judgment and rejection from an industry controlled by men who saw them as threats. Rosie and Ellen found each other. They became part of a chosen family. Rosie, Ellen, Katie Lang, Melissa Etheridge. Women who understood what it meant to survive in an industry that wanted to destroy them. Women who formed a protective alliance because nobody else would. And in that alliance, Rosie made a choice that would haunt her for decades. When Ellen needed protection, real, concrete protection, Rosie risked everything to provide it. She used her stage. She used her credibility. She protected Ellen at a time when Ellen had absolutely nothing.
Wait a minute. I'm a big fan of Casey Kasem. Listen.
You go, girl.
Maybe I'm Lebanese.
You could be Lebanese.
I could be Lebanese myself. I didn't know that.
Rosie stood beside Ellen, risking her own career, genuinely believing their shared history meant they would always have each other's backs. She had no idea that this act of loyalty was only establishing her as a future liability, because Rosie knew things. Rosie had witnessed Ellen's real self. Rosie was a threat to the brand that Ellen was about to build, and Ellen never forgot that. By 2003, Ellen launched her talk show. And she didn't just replace Rosie, she erased her. She rewrote history. She made sure nobody would ever know about the connection between them. She did the same thing to everyone else. On September 7, 2004, Ellen appeared on CNN with Larry King. And when asked about Rosie, about the woman who had sacrificed everything to protect her, Ellen said this. Rosie was watching at home with her wife. She heard the woman she had protected, the woman she had stood beside when it mattered most, completely erase her, completely deny their entire history, completely dismiss the sacrifice that Rosie had made.
I did think that she was all of a sudden in the position I was in, where she was starting a show and wanted it to be successful and get the money and the accolades that came with it. And instead of deciding to stand next to me and hold my hand, which is what I did to her, she did the opposite.
This wasn't an isolated incident. This was the beginning of a deliberate system. A system designed to eliminate anyone who could expose Ellen's real self. A system that extended far beyond hurt feelings between comedians. Because Ellen didn't just erase Rosie. She did it to Kathy Griffin. She did it to Margaret Cho. She did it to anyone who had worked with Ellen, supported Ellen, or understood Ellen before Ellen became untouchable. And when they tried to speak up, when they tried to to warn people, Ellen didn't just ignore them. She used her platform to destroy them. Kathy Griffin saw through Ellen's persona early. She recognized the controlling behavior. She recognized the pattern, and she tried to warn people.
When, all this Harvey Weinstein stuff is going on, I kind of know certain words and certain triggers, and I'm kind of aware of all that stuff. And, I was myself twice.
All it looked to me was like a controlling the process, saying, you're going to say this to save face from me.
Kathy saw it. She documented it. She warned people about Ellen's mean streak in her 2016 book. But Ellen didn't just ignore it. Ellen called Kathy.
I just love giving Ellen because it just never gets old. She just can't stand it. She has no sense of humor about herself. We had a fight one time that was a knockdown drag out, screaming on the phones, both of us screaming.
Ellen used her power to threaten, to intimidate, to make sure that anyone who spoke the truth about her would face consequences. This was the pattern. This was how Ellen operated. Margaret Cho experienced the exact same thing. Margaret opened for Ellen in the 1980s. They had years of history on the road. They were part of that chosen family that survived the brutal 80s together. But when Margaret appeared on Ellen's talk show years later, Ellen acted like Margaret was a complete stranger. Ellen cut Margaret's segment. Ellen even removed a kind compliment that David Bowie had paid to Margaret.
It was really weird and not nice to me for most of my career, and because I opened for her in the 1980s.
On Ellen's show, nobody could shine brighter than Ellen. The spotlight was hers, only hers. But here's what most people missed. This system of elimination wasn't just about protecting Ellen's reputation. It was about protecting something much, much bigger. Because Ellen wasn't just a talk show host with a mean streak. She was a bridge, a connector, a woman with access to the most powerful people in the world. People who had everything to lose if their secrets ever came out. Think about that for a second. Ellen was in rooms with presidents, celebrities, billionaires, producers, network executives, people who controlled entire industries. And she had earned the trust of all of them because she seemed safe. She seemed nice. She seemed like she would never tell. But what if that wasn't an accident? What if her job wasn't just to be on television? What if her real function was to protect these people? What if her Be Kind brand was specifically designed to provide cover for a network that was doing unimaginable things?
Ellen DeGeneres is named in the Epstein documents, and that part is real. Her name appears in the broader index of over 300 high-profile individuals that show up across the investigative materials. Flight logs, communications, third-party interviews, peripheral records.
Her name is in the Epstein documents. That's not a theory. That's not a conspiracy. That's documented fact. She flew on the Lolita Express. She was connected to Epstein's circle. She had access. But here's what the mainstream media wouldn't touch. Here's what nobody wanted to say out loud. Ellen was part of the system that protected what was happening on that island. She used her platform not to expose what was happening. She used it to cover it up, because that's what her Be Kind brand actually did. It provided perfect cover for someone who was participating in a network that was destroying lives, especially young lives. The victims on the Epstein network weren't adults making choices. They were children. They were teenagers, some as young as 13, and they were being transported, abused, and silenced by a massive network of powerful people. And according to Rosie and Kathy, Ellen was part of the mechanism that kept them silent. Think about how that works. Ellen stands on television every single day preaching kindness, building this untouchable brand. And meanwhile, that same brand gives her access to the most powerful circles. It gives her protection. It allows her to move through elite spaces without suspicion. Because nobody suspects the person who spends 8 hours a day telling people to be nice to each other. That's the mask. And it worked for nearly 2 full decades. But in 2023, something shifted. Kathy Griffin decided to do what nobody else in mainstream media would do. She decided to have Sasha Riley on her podcast. Sasha Riley isn't a random person looking for 15 minutes of fame. He's a 52-year-old retired Army sergeant who claims he was illegally transported and mistreated as a child in the 1980s by a massive network of high-profile individuals. Sasha was going to sit down on Kathy's podcast and name names. He was going to detail the flight logs. He was going to describe what really happened on that island. He was going to give voice to the other survivors, the young people who had been silenced for decades. This was the interview that could have changed everything. But the network doesn't operate by playing fair. It operates by intimidation. It operates by overwhelming legal force. It operates by making examples out of people who try to tell the truth.
I was investigated by the Department of Justice,
So you're the queen of
who
cancel.
put me under an investigation, put me on the no-fly list, interrogated me under oath, and were considering charging me with conspiracy.
At the very last minute, Kathy was forced to cancel the interview. The silencing machine had been activated. activated. The message was crystal clear. If Kathy aired that interview, if she let Sasha Riley speak, if she let the victims tell their stories, the legal consequences would be endless. They would sue her into oblivion. They would destroy her life. They would use federal agencies against her. And here's what's important. Kathy, knowing what she was up against, knowing that she couldn't win a legal battle against a network with unlimited resources and unlimited protection, Kathy made the hardest decision of her life. She canceled.
I was told repeatedly, daily almost, that radio silence was of the utmost importance to protect the other survivors. And to that I say, I don't know who the hell they are.
That's the pattern. Radio silence. Don't speak. Protect the network. Protect the people in power. Let the victims suffer in silence. And that's exactly what Ellen's network was doing. They were silencing the people who could expose what was happening. They were using threats, legal intimidation, federal investigations, career destruction, whatever it took to keep the victims quiet. But here's what the silencing machine didn't understand. The very act of silencing Kathy proved exactly how deep this goes. It proved that there are people so powerful, so connected, so afraid of exposure that they will weaponize federal agencies to protect their secrets. And it proved that Ellen was part of that network. Because if she wasn't, why would the Department of Justice care about Kathy's podcast interview? If Ellen was innocent, why would the government shut down the story? By 2023, Ellen knew the walls were closing in. The toxic workplace scandal had already destroyed her public brand, but that was nothing compared to what was coming. Because behind the toxic workplace stuff, hidden in the blind items, connected through flight logs and witness testimonies, was the Epstein network. And Rosie and Kathy were tearing that network apart. Ellen needed to get out. She needed to put distance between herself and the investigation. She needed to be far away when the inevitable finally arrived. So Ellen and her wife Portia packed up their bags and fled the United States. Ellen's PR team told the world that she was leaving because of politics, because she was so upset about the election, because she needed to escape the political situation in America. But here's the thing. Ellen had built her entire brand on never taking a political stance. She had specifically avoided politics her entire career because politics divides people, and Ellen's brand was all about unity and kindness. So why would she suddenly flee the country over politics? Rosie saw through it immediately, because Rosie knows Ellen's history. Rosie knows that Ellen would never take a political stand. Rosie knew exactly why Ellen was running. Ellen wasn't running from politics. She was running from Rosie and Kathy. She was running from the whistleblowers. She was running from the moment when the final files would be released and the truth would be undeniable. She needed the Cotswolds. She needed an ocean between herself and U.S. jurisdiction. She needed distance. She needed time. But running doesn't always mean you're safe. Sometimes it just means you bought yourself a little more time. And Ellen was about to find out how little time that actually was. Because while Ellen was hiding in England, Kathy was making a choice. Even with federal investigators bearing down on her, even with threats of conspiracy charges, even with her life on the line, Kathy refused to stay silent.
I have an epic war with Ellen DeGeneres. And I have a loathing for her that is epic in size as well.
You know, mostly about children and women. And those are the people that I always wanted to protect and take care of.
I am like sort of blacklisted in Hollywood because they're afraid of me.
One thing I want to do is I just want to stay in it. You know, I'm not going to let them.
This is where everything changed. This is where Kathy finally said what Rosie had been afraid to say publicly. This is where Kathy named what Ellen had actually done. And Rosie was listening. Rosie had been telling this story for years. She had been warning people about Ellen. She had been trying to expose the pattern of behavior. And nobody listened. Nobody cared. The mainstream media was too afraid to touch it. The industry was too protective of Ellen. But Kathy refused to be silenced. And when Kathy finally exposed Ellen's role in the protection network, when Kathy connected Ellen to the system that silenced victims, Rosie broke down. Not because Kathy was exposing Ellen's mean streak. Rosie already knew about that. Rosie had experienced that personally. Rosie broke down because Kathy was finally validating what Rosie had known all along. Kathy was connecting the dots that everyone else was too afraid to connect. Kathy was saying out loud, Ellen wasn't just a talk show host with a bad personality. Ellen was a gatekeeper. Ellen was a protector of predators. And in that moment, two women who had been erased, silenced, and dismissed by the most powerful talk show host in television history stood together and told the truth.
Only tell the truth. That's all people want now is authenticity.
Yeah.
We've been lied to for so long. by, mainstream media.
This was the moment that everything shifted, because Rosie and Kathy weren't just exposing Ellen's cruelty to her competitors, they were exposing Ellen's role in silencing the victims. They were exposing the Be Kind brand as a shield for predators. Ellen spent decades building a brand that would protect her. Ellen spent decades using her platform to eliminate threats. Ellen spent decades perfecting the art of appearing kind while participating in something very different. But the masks eventually crack, and when they do, everything underneath comes pouring out. As of right now, Ellen has returned to the United States. She purchased property in California. She's trying to rebuild. She's hoping that enough time has passed, that enough noise has been made about other things, that people will move on and forget. But Rosie and Kathy aren't forgetting, and the files are still being released. There are still millions of files, many of them heavily redacted, many of them yet to be released. With each release, more names surface, more connections are exposed, more victims come forward, and Ellen's name keeps appearing. What happens next depends on whether the legal system is willing to do what the mainstream media couldn't do, actually hold powerful people accountable. It depends on whether Rosie and Kathy's evidence, their testimonies, their connections, their understanding of what Ellen knew and what Ellen did is ever heard in a courtroom. It depends on whether Ellen's return to the United States was a strategic mistake, because now she's back in U.S. jurisdiction. Now she's exposed to subpoenas. Now she's within reach. Two women stood alone for decades, carrying the weight of what they knew. Two women watched Ellen build an empire on a lie. Two women suffered as Ellen destroyed anyone who threatened her image, but they never backed down. And when they finally stood together, when they finally told the truth, the entire structure that Ellen had spent decades building started to collapse. The Be Kind brand is shattered. The public image is destroyed. The network's protection is cracking. And the victims, the young people who were silenced for decades, finally have witnesses who are willing to speak for them. That's the real story. That's what Rosie and Kathy exposed. That's the reckoning that's still unfolding.